morning, everyone. My name is Takara, and I'm the Director of Education at the Santa Fe Council on International Relations. I'm so glad you all could join us this morning for our second and final student session of Journalism Under Fire 2020. Just quickly in the chat box, if you would, type where you're joining us from this morning, so your location and whether you're a high school student or a college student. And it's just for our curiosity so that way we can get a better sense of who's in the room. I hope that you've been able to watch some of our live streams for Journalism Under Fire for the past 2 weeks. If you haven't been able to participate, we do record all of the sessions and we put them on our YouTube channel. Once I'm done with the introduction, I will go ahead and put that link into the chat box. So you are welcome to follow that after this session's over. One of the talks I would flag is we had an awesome talk with Professor Fareed from UC Berkeley this past Thursday. And he had one of the most engaging presentations I've seen this entire year during this digital era of learning. So I would recommend you check him out, and you can learn about how deep fakes are created and also what we can do to detect deep fakes. So that will be on our website. And then a couple of other quick housekeeping notes before I turn it over. Please use the chat box for any comments, but we will have Q&A at the end of this session. And I would ask that you type in your questions into the Q&A box, not the comments box. This session is geared towards students. While teachers and adults are more than welcome to attend, and we're happy to have you, I will be giving preference to student questions. And last, but certainly not least, CIR has purchased 10 copies of Cindy's book, True or False, a CIA Analyst Guide to Spotting Fake News. We will be having a random draw at the end of the session today. If your name is selected to receive a copy of the book, I will be in contact with you via email shortly. And now, finally, it is my privilege to introduce Margot, who is a senior at the Ask Academy in Rio Rancho and one of our extraordinary high school fellows. Margot will be introducing our speaker this morning.
Thank you, Takara. Our speaker this morning is Cindy L. Otis. She is a former CIA officer and an expert on disinformation threat analysis and counter-messaging. She is also a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab and an associate at Argonne National Lab. Prior to joining the private sector in 2017, she served in the CIA as a military analyst, intelligence briefer, and a manager in the Directorate of Intelligence. While at the CIA, she specialized in security issues in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. She is the author of the newly released True or False, a CIA Analyst's Guide to Spotting Fake News.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Margot, and thank you to CIR for having me, and thanks to everyone for joining today and spending your part of your Saturday with me. I'm excited to be here. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. Okay. Hopefully you can see it. Let me know, Takara, if it's not showing up. Otherwise, I will. Okay. Thank you for the thumbs up. Okay. So I'm excited to get to talk to you about an issue that I essentially eat, sleep, and breathe, which is disinformation, misinformation, and fake news. So just first, a little bit about me, some key things. So I am Cindy Otis. As Margot mentioned, I am the author of True or False, a CIA Analyst Guide to Spotting Fake News, which came out in July. And as the title would suggest, and as Margot mentioned, I'm a former CIA officer. So I served in the agency from 2007 to 2017, where I was an analyst and a bunch of other things, spent a lot of time overseas, spent a bunch of my career undercover, and all of those fun things. Very happy to answer any questions that you might have to the extent that I can answer about my career, if that's of interest during the Q&A portion. And then I also own a company. I run a company called Alethea Group with my business partner, and it's a disinformation investigation and remediation firm. And I'll talk a little bit more about the kinds of things that we do, or it'll become sort of obvious the kinds of things that we do based on my presentation. And then lastly, but certainly not least, I am the proud dog mom of these two little pups that you see in the picture. And in fact, you can see one of my little doggies that snuck in right before my presentation, hanging out, providing moral support in the chair behind me. Their names, the little one is Dash, the big one who's in the chair is Lily. So that is an important thing I always share with people. Okay, so let's talk about disinformation. So you might have heard about disinformation before. You might have seen it in the news, people talking about it like me on the news. You might have heard some other terms like misinformation or fake news. But let's sort of level set here by talking about what they actually mean and how they are different. So disinformation is the deliberate and coordinated spread of false information. So that means the person who's creating the false content or spreading it online absolutely knows that it's false and they're spreading it anyways. And usually here, the intention with spreading that false information is to manipulate people's opinions, change people's views on something, or encourage certain behaviors. And again, that's intentionally using false information. And then misinformation is the thing we see more often than disinformation. And misinformation is the unintentional spread of false information. So that's when you see somebody make a post on social media. It's a picture. Maybe the picture has been like edited to make the person in the picture look different than how they really are. And you share that picture not knowing that it's false or that it's been manipulated, right? So the key difference between these two terms is really about intention. Why are you, do you know if this information is false? And then if you do know that it's false, you're intentionally spreading it. And then it's not on this slide, but just to sort of cover really quickly, you've probably heard the term fake news quite a lot in recent years. So fake news is actually, at least in the English language version of it, is a term that's been around for quite a long time. Though I think a lot of people started hearing it just, within the last 4 to 5 years. The way that it's been used by political leaders around the world in recent years has been about sort of talking about actual news that is critical of them or that they don't particularly like. And that's how the term has been used. But what it actually means is closer more to disinformation. So the way it's historically been used is false information intentionally spread, knowing that it's false with an intention to mislead or manipulate. So like I said, closer to that disinformation term. And it's important to understand how that term has been changed in recent years by people that are sort of trying to change the meaning of it, right? So how does it work? I have a graphic here, but it is not showing up on my screen. I'm not sure why it's not showing up. Takara, can you give me a thumbs up if you see it, the graphic? Okay.
I saw briefly that there might have been like a transition on your slide. If you hit the next button.
Oh. Yes, thank you. So this was, this particular graphic was made by not me. It was made by my coworker who is much better at this stuff than I am. And so I didn't realize that I had a transition. Thank you. Okay, so how does it work? So essentially, if we start with, let me back up then. There we go. Okay, so various, what I would call, back in my old CIA days, a threat actor. There are different threat actors, groups, individuals, and governments that use false information intentionally, so disinformation. So they might do so for financial reasons. That is, they realize that you can make money by spreading lies. So for example, I spend a lot of my time in my profession uncovering things like foreign companies that claim to be something like a public relations firm or a communications firm that actually are selling things like fake social media accounts to go and push false information on social media, or they sell other kinds of what they call online influence. So that would be an example of a company or a group or an individual that is motivated by money, by making money from false information. And then there are political or politically motivated individuals. And this would be maybe like a foreign government, for example. You might have heard a lot in recent years about the Russian government spreading false information about the United States and about our political candidates back in 2016 as a way of trying to influence the results of the presidential election in 2016. So they were politically motivated here because Russia is a country that sees the United States as an enemy, is looking to sort of erode our credibility globally. And so they have found it in their best interest to use false information against us to try to weaken the United States. So that's an example of a politically motivated threat actor. And then there are some groups or individuals out there who might be focused on sort of reputational issues. So this would be, for example, a big company that doesn't like the fact that its competitors are maybe doing better than they are. And so they look to use false information to or misleading information to target the reputation and brand of a competitor, to weaken them so that they can grow as a company. So those are the kinds of players and threat actors that are out there. And then they take advantage of the fact that we have technology, right? We have social media, we have the ability to, thanks to the internet and social media, reach basically anybody, anywhere in the world almost instantly. I don't know if anybody that's listening in has ever gone viral, but how quickly do you go viral? I mean, that's sort of the definition of virality, right? Going viral can take seconds sometimes. And so when you're looking to use false information for particular reasons, you use the internet, right? Because you can reach anybody, like I said, anywhere in the world, and you can do it very, very quickly. So we have all these different platforms: Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, in which these threat actors on the left-hand side of the graphic can deploy false information. And they might do it in different ways, right? They might use disinformation, so blatantly false information that they're pushing, knowing that it's false. They might take advantage of the fact that misinformation circulates so much. Again, those of us who are sharing content, we don't know it's false, right? They might just sort of let us share false information because it still helps them achieve their goals. They might use things like fake news, and I'm gonna give you an example of some of that in a minute. They might also hack. So one of the things that Russia did in 2016 was that they hacked the servers of the Democratic National Committee to gain access to documents that they then claimed were very nefarious and proved all of this corruption. But nothing nefarious was in those documents, but it was the fact that Russia said, essentially this material was hacked that created this idea that there was all of this sort of corruption uncovered in these documents. So hacking can be really effective, even if they don't find very much through that hacking. And then another tactic is to overwhelm the system. So that is, doing just tons of posting, tons of websites, sharing tons of content, all saying the same false thing, so that when we, the social media users or the people who are online looking at this information, when we see it, it sounds familiar to us because we've seen it somewhere else before. And when we think that content is familiar, our brains tend to automatically assume it is therefore true. So overwhelming the system with false information, just flooding that information system is a really key tactic of these threat actors on the left-hand side of the screen, looking to spread false information. And then ultimately, they're looking to get to you and me, right? These threat actors know that if they, for example, are tweeting some sort of false story and no actual real human being like me or you sees it, it doesn't, they can tweet until they're blue in the face. It has no impact, right? They're trying to get this content in front of me and you, convince us enough of that content that we end up sharing it and passing it on to those around us. That's how it spreads, right? So, so they're trying to get us to share it, and ultimately they're trying to influence the way we're thinking about things and our behaviors. So that's essentially how it works. So I want to pause here for a second and just take a quick little poll. I would love for you to drop into the chat basically the answer to, when you want to find news-like information, what websites, social media platforms, and or media outlets do you go to? And Takara is going to keep an eye on the chat for me. So just take a minute and pop it in.
Yep, so y'all just put it in the chat. Yep, perfect. Thank you, Angus. Cindy, do you want me to read some of the options I'm seeing come up?
That'd be great.
Yep. So we have the New York Times, Pulitzer Center, BBC. One of them that was really interesting was trusted news sites. NBC. I look at multiple sites to check if it has multiple coverings. Al Jazeera, Instagram, Twitter, New York Times.
Wow, those are some great answers.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. So, and I think you all are a bit of a deviation from the norm, because research shows that most people your age tend to go to Snapchat first for information. So this is really interesting, and obviously a sign of the training you all have received, the education you all have received that has led you to some really good sources of information. So that's great. I'm glad to hear it. So feel free to keep popping things into the chat if you like. I'll be curious to read them afterwards. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some examples of how disinformation might show up for you in your social media feeds or on websites that you might sort of wander into or onto. So fake news websites. So this is a particular topic that I really enjoy because I spend a lot of my time doing digital forensic investigations online, looking for people running large networks of things like fake websites coupled with fake accounts and things like that. So fake news websites. So this would be a website that somebody creates to push particular false kinds of content. The examples that I have for you, I have two of them. So this first one is a screenshot of a website that came online in 2016 called Christian Times Newspaper. Sounds fairly legit. They came out with a story on September 30th, 2016, in which the headline was, "Breaking, tens of thousands of fraudulent Clinton votes found in Ohio warehouse." Now, this story ended up going viral. It became used in claims of, as evidence in claims of voter fraud in 2016. But the reality is this website was created by a 23-year-old guy who just graduated from college and was feeling very burdened by his student loans, which were astronomical, and he decided he needed to make some quick cash. Meanwhile, his favorite candidate was running for president, and he decided he could both make money and help his candidate win. So he created this website, filled it with, and don't get any ideas from this, no one should leave this talk and go and do the same thing. But he filled his website with pay-per-click ads so that every time somebody came to his website and clicked on one of the ads, he made a percentage off of that ad. And he created this completely 100% false story, created a fictitious guy, a fictitious warehouse. He photoshopped this picture of this guy with these supposedly ballot boxes. He labeled them ballot boxes. They were just tubs. It was just a picture he found online that he just manipulated. he made thousands of dollars from running this fake news website, but he created these stories entirely himself in his kitchen, from his kitchen table. And this particular story, even though the guy was discovered, a New York Times investigator found him, and he was exposed, he shut down the website. This story still gets circulated online as evidence of voter fraud in the United States. I saw it recently pop up in the context of the 2020 election. But there were signs that people could have seen if they had looked into the website at all. One thing that you might notice right off the bat is that in the screenshot where it lists who the author is, it should be a reporter's name. But this website says by admin one, which is the automatic author name given on a WordPress site when you're using a WordPress template. The person didn't bother changing the name to come up with the reporter's name. So there were things like that about this website that were very obviously dubious if anyone had bothered to look. The second example is a fake website that copied or at least tried to make themselves look like the real website for CNN. And they published an article saying that Walmart was selling bananas that had been infected with HIV/AIDS, and that people were contracting AIDS from these infected bananas. And there's a long story to this. I actually talk about it in my book. I talk about both of these examples in my book. But the long story is somebody posted a picture of this wonky banana that they found at a Walmart. And this is actually a normal fruit virus. It can happen to any fruit, it just sort of discolors it is all. They posted on Facebook that they'd found this wonky fruit. Someone took that picture and created this fake CNN website essentially as a hoax to scare people into suggesting that Walmart produce was infected with AIDS. So that's something you might come across. If you're on social media at all, chances are you have also come across some fake social media accounts. I know I get them all the time on Twitter and Instagram in particular. This is an example of one of the many fake dudes that I get that likes to follow me. So this is Brian Gorge. Brian Gorge just created his Twitter account on November 2020. And there are a couple of things that I did to quickly find that this guy was completely fake. One, these sort of very half-baked, quickly created fake accounts often do a very like awkward header profile picture, like who wants a close-up of their face as their header profile. So that was sort of sign number one. Sign number two, the account was just created, like I said, in November 2020. Sign number three is his bio read a little bit weird to me. A cool guy, always loves having fun, a father to the most amazing son, a coffee drinker, cowboy, traveler's business owner, and a contractor. Not particularly grammatically correct, a little confusing. Just a bit of an odd profile or a bio for a profile. So that also caught my attention. When I clicked on the list of who he was following, it was primarily almost entirely women. Okay, so clue number, whatever we're at now, 4 or 5. And then the last thing that I did with this guy, or the second to last thing was I did a reverse image search on his profile picture. So I took a quick screenshot of his profile picture. And then if you go to Google, you can search on an image. So you just upload the image to Google and it shows you all of the times in which it's been used before. Well, it comes back that this profile picture is actually of a real man whose name is not Brian Gorge, and it's been used in fake profiles, as you can see on the right, all over the internet and in videos. And then the very last thing I did was, and this sort of is how you can sort of figure out what a particular fake account is trying to do. I looked at his tweets. What had he tweeted? What had he tweeted? So he had only replied, he had only posted as replies to different accounts, and he was only commenting in replies to women, and all of his replies were things like, hey, want to chat? Hey girl, hey baby, what's going on? So this is an example of what I would call a romance scam account. So a fake account created by individuals who then use these accounts to target who they think are vulnerable targets. They try to strike up a conversation with them. They look for people who, if they sort of reply to as many people as possible, maybe someone will reply to them and engage in a conversation. And then through the course of that conversation, they slowly start to be like, I just think you're really great. I think we have a lot in common. I would love to come visit you, but boy, am I having financial problems. And then their hope is the person will be like, oh gosh, financial problems? Well, let me know if I can help. And he's like, well, great. Why don't you send over your banking details? Or hey, why don't you send me some Amazon gift cards? Then I can come and see you and we can be together like we always planned. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but people fall for it. These people make so much money. A lot of them are based in, there are a lot of these sort of networks of people that run these kinds of accounts out of places like Nigeria and Kenya. So that is something you have probably come across if you've been on social media. And then another thing you have no doubt seen in your social media is false information used in things like memes, edited videos, and edited pictures. So a couple of examples here, recent, all of them. So the first one is a picture posted by a Facebook account where it's a picture of some buses getting fuel at a gas station. And the buses say on the side, Soros Riot Dance Squad. So particularly since there has been national protests over police violence in the last couple of months, there has been this conspiracy theory idea that has gone viral and spread over and over and over again, that people are being paid by an individual named George Soros, who's a philanthropist and a wealthy person, being paid by this person to travel from town to town, mostly in the Midwest, and conduct riots, particularly in small Midwestern towns. It's completely false, but this rumor persists, and this picture was posted as evidence. Well, the picture was photoshopped. The Soros Riot Dance Squad that is shown on the side of the bus was added in. It's just buses getting fuel. But this has gone viral multiple times. It's been debunked by fact checkers over and over and over again, but it still shows up on social media. The second one is a video of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and the video has gone viral. It continues to be online. Social media platforms decided not to do anything about it, like take it down, for example, or fact check it, though I think some of the platforms have labels on it now. But basically, this video was edited and her voice track was slowed down significantly to make her sound like she was slurring and to suggest that she was drunk when she was giving this, this little talk. But it was completely manipulated, but as I said, it's gone viral. And it was very easily manipulated. Slowing down a voice track is very simple to do. The third one is a meme that circulated. It just says despicable, disgusting, inexcusable. And it claims to be a meme with a picture showing the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. And they use it to say that that rioters came and defaced this memorial, supposedly. Well, upon investigating this this meme, it's actually a picture of a war memorial in South Africa. It's not the United States, it's in South Africa, and it was several years ago. No Americans were involved, had nothing to do with any of the protests going on, but it has been used and gone viral to suggest that Americans are rioting and defacing, sort of patriotic monuments. So this kind of thing is no doubt something you see all the time. And part of it is that things like images and videos are very eye-catching for us. They're very, they're vivid, they grab our attention, they're evidence. We think they're evidence, right? Because we can see it with our eyes. If it's a video, we can hear it. And so people who are intentionally spreading false information know that. They know that we're bound to trust something more if we can see it. For ourselves, which is why so many of these things are often false. Okay, hold on. False, false. Okay. And then another category of thing that you may have come across is foreign state-backed media. So in some other countries, the government owns, operates, or financially supports media outlets. And in some of these countries, they do that for a particular reason, which is to make sure that the government line is promoted, that they can control what sorts of messages are disseminated to the public, and they can escape scrutiny. In the United States, we have written into the Constitution the idea of a free press, and that is in large part so that the media can hold elected officials accountable, so that they can expose things like corruption and that sort of thing. They're considered the fourth pillar of our democracy. But that's, of course, not the case in many, many other countries. So these are examples that I have on the screen now of media outlets that are run by their respective governments or sponsored by, supported by their respective governments in China, Russia, and Iran. So some of the headlines that you see are things like, for this first one is from a Chinese government-run news outlet, where the headline is, quote, might be US Army who brought virus epidemic to Wuhan. So there was a conspiracy theory promoted by the Chinese government that the US military created the coronavirus in a military weapons lab. So that has been promoted by Chinese government state-run media as a way of targeting the United States. The next example is a Russian government-run outlet called Sputnik, which has had a great time lately pushing the false idea that our recent 2020 election was riddled with election fraud. So as I mentioned earlier, Russia has an invested interest in denigrating our credibility on the world stage, on saying that our democracy is actually destructive and terrible. And so they promote this claim over and over and over again to show the rest of the world, see, the United States isn't as great as it claims to be. So they use their state-run media outlets to do that. And then Iran has used its own state-run media to claim that the United States is on the verge of a civil war. So you have to watch out for these state-run media outlets because, again, they're parroting the talking points of their respective governments. The other thing is that while social media companies have, and this is Facebook and Twitter largely, have now added labels to a lot of the outlets. So if you go onto the Facebook page, the verified Facebook page for Sputnik, for example, it'll say state-run media on it. So while they've added that, a lot of these media outlets own smaller offshoot media outlets, and they own them both overtly and covertly. So they run all sorts of websites that claim to be news outlets where maybe the public doesn't know that it's actually being run by, again, the government-owned media. So you have to watch out for that. Okay. So those are some of the examples of things you may have come across in your social media feeds or online when you're wandering on websites. But I want to talk for a minute about, like, why do we actually care about this, though? Why should we care? Why should we take the time to think about the kinds of information that we're consuming? Or why should we care if Russia is out there spreading lies about us, or Iran or China is spreading lies about us? Well, it's about impact. So I gave you some examples of a website here, a meme there, an edited video here. And while by themselves, those things might not seem like very bad ideas, or like they might have any impact, they actually do end up having impact over time. So we're constantly, whether we know it or not, we're constantly seeing false and misleading information in our social media feeds and online on the websites that we like to visit. By, again, not actual legitimate media outlets, but by others that are trying to get that false content in front of us. And again, because they're trying to manipulate us, change our behavior, influence our opinion, and all of that, we're essentially exposed to this false information over extended periods of time. And it does change the way we think about things. So a couple of examples, there was this false conspiracy theory that's still still percolating online, but it was particularly popular when the coronavirus pandemic first began. And it claimed that the coronavirus was created by 5G. So what is being set up to make our cell phones, better, faster, stronger, essentially, with stronger connectivity. So it was this completely out there conspiracy that somehow these like invisible cell phone tower waves were creating coronavirus. And it actually caused several instances in the UK in particular in which people legitimately thought that cell phone towers had caused the pandemic and tried to blow them up and burn them down. So a real physical attack on our infrastructure. Another example, and unfortunately there are a lot of examples like this, going back to some of the conspiracies and rumors that I talked about earlier, where people have mistakenly believed that there are, paid protesters running around being paid to riot and loot and destroy cities. So a multi-race family went camping for a weekend in Washington State. And some people who lived in that town saw them, made conclusions very quickly about them, decided that they were part of Antifa. And the town essentially started physically threatening them, harassing them. At one point, some people, they were just camping, and some people came and cut down trees into the road to block their ability to escape. And then they were planning to essentially attack these people because they decided that they were violent people. Well, obviously they were not. And it was actually some high school students that intervened and got the family essentially safely out of town. But again, these are real world harms. What if those high school students hadn't been there to intervene? What would have happened to this poor family that was targeted? Another similar example is that a man took his son, who uses a wheelchair, to Walmart, and their vehicle that they had to drive that was accessible was a sort of like minibus kind of thing with a ramp. And again, that conspiracy, that fake conspiracy about paid protesters showing up on vans. Some people saw it in the parking lot, said, "We have paid protesters here, come down here and everybody come help out." And it turned out it was just this man who was taking his son shopping. And imagine if, people had decided to act and maybe like torch his vehicle or something like that before figuring out who he was. So there is real world impact, real world physical harm that can happen as a result of false information being spread online. And so my sort of plea to everyone is that we take it seriously and we fight back. So I do want to save lots of time for questions. So I am going to try and like blitz through this quick. But I want to talk about some things that you can do, some habits and tips, hopefully that aren't overwhelming, but are things that you can put into practice as you consume information every day. And these tips are taken straight from my book, so you can get more there about them. And it's also, I did this in collaboration with a really fantastic organization called the News Literacy Project, where I do a lot of partnering to help get this kind of education into schools and make available to educators. So the first tip is that because so much false information is about trying to go viral, about like stoking emotions, making us afraid of something, and all of that, so that we'll share the content. The first step, whenever you see content, particularly when it makes you feel a certain emotion very strongly, is to pause. Don't share it. Pause first. And then do a little bit of investigating. Look at what kind of post is it? Is it a social media? Is it coming from a social media account that you recognize? Does that person actually have expertise in the content that they're sharing? Are they, is it a news outlet? Is it not a news outlet? Are they citing their sources? Are they linking to a website? If they are linking to a website, what is the website? Who created it? What is it? Is it a media outlet that you recognize or not? Tip number 2 is memes aren't news. And that is actually one of the chapter titles of my book, Memes Aren't News. So, just based on the example that I gave alone of a meme that was made completely out of context, was completely false, and sparked a lot of anger by people who thought it was true, you really have to watch out for things like memes and other kinds of content that use things like videos and imagery, because again, we tend to look at those things as evidence because we can see them for ourselves. But they're not news. They're usually a picture with some sort of very emotional kinds of language on it, or some sort of vivid video, but they're things that you need to verify first before sharing. The third tip is to keep in mind that likes and shares and things like follower numbers are not evidence of credibility or accuracy. So just because something goes viral doesn't actually mean that it's true. Just because your favorite influencer may have 500,000 followers or 1 million followers doesn't mean that they're right or that they're experts on the things they're talking about. And so you want to find, one of the great things about social media is that you can very easily find experts on any given topic that you might be interested in. If you're interested in astronomy, there are all sorts of, astronauts and astronomers that you can find on social media talking about astronomy every single day. If you want to learn about disinformation and find a disinformation expert, you can find me on Twitter talking about it every day, or national security or something like that. There's a whole national security community on Twitter and other social media platforms. But likes and shares and follower numbers do not equal credibility. So you have to do a little bit of research sometimes to figure out whether someone's got the experience and expertise to really speak authoritatively about the things they're discussing. Tip number 6, don't feed the trolls. So one of the tactics that those threat actors that we started with in the beginning of this presentation use to spread false content is trolls. And trolls are actually real humans operating accounts. So as opposed to another term you might have heard, which is bots, and which are automated accounts that are automatically created to post content. Trolls are actually real people. And their intention is to harass and bully and get people to engage through negative behaviors. And this helps amplify the trolls, and it amplifies the messages and the narratives and the false claims that they're trying to make. And so when you see trolls, and no doubt you've all experienced trolling, I know I have, particularly as a woman on social media, the best thing you can do is not respond. Report, block, mute, whatever, but don't give them any air. Don't help them fan the flames. Don't let them elevate their hate and their false narratives. And then tip number 7 is steer clear of conspiratorial thinking. So one of the things, and why I always make such a plea for people to adopt good, simple information consumption habits like the ones that I've just been talking about, is because when we decide like we're too overwhelmed, like this is too hard, we don't want to put in the effort, it's easier just not to trust anything, what actually happens is that we end up being attracted to and more sort of drawn to more conspiratorial ways of thinking and more fringe ideas. So when we say, that's it, I just can't trust anything, you end up believing in things naturally that are actually more fringe and inaccurate than you did before. Our brains just automatically lead us down that path. So what we found with like coronavirus, for example, information about coronavirus, is that when people were like, well, you know what, I'm just not going to trust anybody, I'm going to do my own research, I'm not going to believe anything the media is saying about coronavirus, is people have slowly started to put more faith and trust into like a random guy on YouTube who runs a channel where he yells a lot about things he feels passionately about than, for example, a scientist who actually has spent a career studying viruses. And so you want to make sure that you don't give up, that you stay engaged in the process of finding good sources of information, of researching where your information is coming from, in doing a little bit of fact checking yourself, and doing things like asking people to cite their sources, because deciding not to believe in anything can be really dangerous. The last point that I would raise that my friends at the News Literacy Project bring up all the time, and I love it, is that credible information doesn't ask you to trust it. It shows you why you should be clearly attributing the facts, and it provides reliable sources. So credible information shows its work. How many times are you told by your math teachers, show your work, don't just give me the answer? So credible sources of information show that work. They show where the information is coming from. They show their sources. They show how much they know and how much they don't know. So that is the last thing that I would leave you with. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think it's a really timely topic, especially given the events that are happening. And so I would urge you all, whether you're a student, a teacher, or an experienced member in our audience, to look more into this topic of mis and disinformation and fake news. Thank you for the presentation. I do have a question from Angus and Ethan, and I'm going to combine your questions. So Ethan wants to know if there's legal ramifications for being caught spreading mis or disinformation. And then on that same thread, how Angus wants to know, how do we censor disinformation without infringing on free speech?
Yeah, those are such great questions. So in the United States, there are not legal ramifications for spreading disinformation. And that is because of the free speech issue that Angus raises. So enshrined in our very founding is the idea that people have a right to free speech. And when you get down to issues like people sharing false information, not knowing that it's false, it might be a personal political opinion, it might be a personal belief, but it's false. That's free speech. That fits into the free speech bucket. And we have to be really careful not to censor people from sharing their ideas. It's a little bit different when people are doing it intentionally, knowing that it's false. But again, there are it's not a simple solution there either. So some countries throughout the world have passed what they call sort of fake news laws. But the countries that have passed those laws are more on the authoritarian side. So a country like Egypt, for example, their legislature in recent years passed some legislation banning fake news, essentially. And what they've used that law to do, actually, is to censor what the actual media reports about the government. They have used it to jail journalists and target their families and harass their families. They have used it to crack down on human rights, and they don't have the same protection of free speech. So they've used it to essentially censor and control their population and physically harm reporters. So there is a huge risk of sort of swinging the pendulum too far, right, in creating legislation that would allow the government to crack down on things like human rights. There are some things that we're able to do when it's a foreign country targeting us, like Russia, for example. The Department of Justice has pursued legal action against the specific individual Russian government officials that ran things like troll farms of fake accounts back in 2016 to target the U.S. election. But it still is a bit more sort of what's the word? Window dressing. It's not real, unless they come here to the United States where we can then arrest them. It's sort of it's a bit for just for a statement, essentially, to make a statement. So it's certainly, the human rights issue is certainly something that we need to have more conversations about in the United States, about making sure that when social media platforms do take action on content, they're not doing it in a way that silences people.
Thank you. I have a really interesting question here from one of our high school fellows, Filippo. He is mentioning that some of the social media platforms have started to flag posts as fake news. He wants to know whether there's any metric for measuring the effectiveness of these policies and whether they're actually countering misinformation.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of those actions are new. And so my understanding is that the social media platforms are still internally reviewing how effective those changes have been. I know that Twitter recently put out something where they, so if anybody uses Twitter, you know that it's changed a little bit in recent weeks. So one of the things that they did is instead of just being able to hit the retweet button and go straight to a retweet, it brings it up as a retweet with comment. And you can still just straight up retweet it, but it always prompts you to provide a comment. And that is something it's called an intervention. And it's a way of essentially slowing down the posting process. Another intervention that they've employed recently as well is if you go to retweet an article, it'll ask you first, if you haven't read the article, do you want to read this article first? Because so much of false information that gets shared unknowingly is because people never read past the headline of the link. They just automatically reshare. They don't read what's actually in the article. So they have added that intervention as well, where it sort of shames you a little bit into being like, hey, we noticed that you didn't actually read what you're about to post. That doesn't seem very smart to us. You want to first read it. And the stats that they've provided so far, particularly for that intervention, it has cut down on I think it was something like 30 to 40% reduction in retweets from that particular intervention. So I'm a proponent of when social media companies look at solutions for this, of actually adding more interventions, slowing down social media a little bit more, and adding a bit more of transparency so people know where their information is coming from, rather than like bulk removing content that might end up in this sort of censorship land.
Thank you. I think the answer to this question is going to be really important for all of the students who are listening today. Margot, another CIR fellow who introduced you earlier today, wants to know, why does false information seem to spread so much quicker than true information?
So it does. It doesn't just seem to. It actually does spread farther and faster than true information. So a couple of things. So one of the things that I talk a lot about in my book is having our own personal biases. We all have biases that affect the way in which we view, consume, and seek out information based on our experiences. So for me, as a when I look at my biases, it's affected by things like I'm an East Coaster, I'm a New Yorker, I lean a certain way politically, I'm a white woman, I'm disabled, I'm a former CIA officer. All of those things affect what information I'm interested in, what information I'm looking for, and how I interpret information when I find it. So it's really, really important for everyone to do that sort of self-analysis to see how their background and experiences affects the information that they consume, because we really dislike being wrong. Our brains are hardwired to constantly be seeking out information that confirms what we already believe. And as Americans in particular, we're really, really confident in our views, even if we don't have much experience in a particular topic. And so when we see information, a post, a tweet, a website, whatever, that hits all those boxes for us, it fits our biases, it tells us we're right. It's quote unquote evidence that we've been right all along. It confirms exactly what we think. We will share that thing. We will share it faster than anything because we're feeling really good about ourselves. It makes us feel like, yeah, okay, I'm right. And it solidifies our views even more, so that the next time when we're confronted with information that actually contradicts our beliefs, our brain automatically is like, oh no, that's wrong. No, not even gonna read it. Not worth looking at, nothing, And then the other piece of it too is that false information, as I sort of talked about a little bit earlier, is often very emotionally rooted. So it's trying to make you feel something so strongly that you don't question it, right? So it's trying to make you feel angry about a particular thing, or fearful. It's trying to make you feel like, the world is coming to an end. Tell everyone, right? So that it will bypass those sort of like critical thinking steps that we all should be employing. And so we just share it instead. And then the last thing sort of like on that point is just, I will say, as a frequent Twitter user, it is always my like slightly emotional, slightly hot take, one tweet that goes viral. And it's never my like, I have done a 25 tweet thread on the nuance of this very complex political issue that is not exactly, what everyone else is saying, right? No one wants to read the 25-point thread. They want the hot take. They want the sensational. They want the emotional that confirms what they think, what they feel, and tells them, yes, they're right. So a lot of that is, all of those things go into why lies spread faster than truth.
I have time for probably 2 more questions.
Okay.
So another one of our fellows, Lucas from Santa Fe High School, wants to know, has disinformation been used historically, or is it a relatively new phenomenon?
Yay, I'm glad you asked that question. Yeah, so it has been used historically. So the first half of my book is actually about charting the history of false information being used. And I go all the way back to ancient Egypt with Ramses II, who lost a war that made him look really bad and decided he was going to make up the fact that he lost the war and instead say that he won it. Had it carved into the temple walls, heralded all over his kingdom that he won this war that he didn't win. And so it has always been used throughout history. And from my perspective, that history is so important to, it's so important to learn about it, because so many of the narratives and the ways in which people use false information, they might not have, had social media back in the times of Ramses. They had papyrus and word of mouth, but so much of the narratives and the ways in which they spread false information is exactly the same today.
And I'm going to ask the last question for this session, and I really appreciate you answering these questions. But for those of the students in the audience, both high school and college, if they are interested in someday having a career that is related to looking at mis and disinformation and fake news and analyst, what would you recommend for them to do now to enhance those skills that are needed?
Yeah, so one of the things that I love most about the community of experts that work on disinformation is that we all come from very different backgrounds. There's no one pathway to getting to this issue. We have people who work the human rights angle of this issue, so all those free speech sorts of things and policies, they come from the human rights world of working in nonprofit spaces. We have academics who went the sort of like professor route and now do research at academic institutions in this. We have people like myself who come from the national security community who have worked careers of working on different countries that use false information and conduct information operations. And now we do that in the private sector, just in different ways on disinformation. We have people who are into the sort of like regulatory policy of this, and they come from having worked as staffers in Congress and things like that. So it really is it's a bit of a choose your own adventure. But I would say, one thing I would do is basically every disinformation expert I love in this space are all on Twitter and other social media platforms, but mostly Twitter. So they're really great people to follow in this space to learn about sort of their pathways to getting to this place. I would say you can never go wrong in this space with having some coursework in something like international affairs, international relations. That was my pathway. I would also say that no matter what career you go into, having a strong background in communications, also learning how to write well, to be able to explain your analysis and your thoughts clearly and coherently is vital. But otherwise, this field is just open for people who are, into cybersecurity, into digital marketing, into communications, innovation, all of those things. It's a great community. So highly recommend as a career.
Cindy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your Saturday to meet with us here in New Mexico, but also in Hawaii. I did see we had some Albanian students, so thank you so much for joining us this morning and afternoon, wherever you're located. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of the awesome questions that there in the chat. I'm really proud of you all for listening to this presentation and being interested and attending. So thank you all. I will be reaching out to the 10 folks who are randomly selected to receive Cindy's book. CIR does have a virtual bookstore that if you are interested in looking into her book, A CIA Analyst Guide to Spotting Fake News, I would encourage you to do so. But for now, thank you so much for joining us, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.